Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel. Can India be a counterweight to China in the global deep tech race? Today, we have with us Asha Jadeja Motwani, who's the founder of Motwani Jadeja Foundation. She's an NFT evangelist and also an investor based out of San Francisco. We also have with us Mr. Ashwin Raghuram, who's a founding partner of Bharat Innovation Fund, and Sushant Rabra, who's a partner management consulting of KPMG. Welcome, everyone, to the panel. Ashwin, what do you think has worked for China that we can emulate from, and what necessary actions have to be taken now to make strides later?
So I think a few things have worked for China, but I don't think we should be looking to emulate China, right?
Okay.
I spent some time back in the day, and this is over a decade back, with India's IT industry body called NASSCOM, right? And worked for NASSCOM for a while, set up my first fund from NASSCOM, in fact, right, to support deep tech startups. We were perhaps the first VC fund with a focus on deep tech startups when deep tech was not even a name or a word or a phrase that was being used in India. And so if I were to think about emulating China, I don't think I would go that way. The way I would think about it is, what can we do which is relevant for India? Having said that, I think, to answer the first part of your question, what has worked for China, very clearly, I think what even Asha alluded to is there's a lot of government support for deep tech that has been there in China for startups as well. And that has been there over the years, right? They have started earlier. They have pumped in more capital. Their customers are very often China-based customers. And so startups that are emerging from there are able to address a very domestic market as well before they go out. Now, we need to see how some of these ingredients can play out in India as well. And if I really look back, our IT industry to a certain extent evolved because not too much with government support. I mean, it was private markets that did it in a sense. Similarly, if we think about the first wave of startups, the e-commerce guys, the Flipkarts, the Olas, they did it with very little support in terms of capital from the government. It was a lot of private venture capital funding. It was private equity funding. It all happened in a very market-oriented manner. And I do think that as far as deep tech is concerned, and I'm seeing the signs, at least with artificial intelligence, there are a ton of very interesting startups that have come about in the last few years that are addressing very complex problems. And most of these have cropped up on their own. They have not been incubated anywhere. They have not been, for example, got capital through programs, grant programs. It's private money that is going in to support these guys because quality of teams, quality of technologies, and the size of the problem they're addressing. And I do think that has been the path for India so far. What I would like, of course, is that there is some amount of government support that does come in as well. And I think what we've been giving to the startup community as a whole in terms of all the support from the government, there needs to be a little bit more focus on deep tech as an area where India can perhaps emerge as one of the leaders. And hopefully that niche, if I can call it that, or that sector, the deep tech sector, gets a little bit of specialized attention.
Where are the opportunities if we were to leverage the geopolitical tailwinds that we are riding on currently? Where are the opportunities that India can make moves on in deep tech?
I think the opportunities are everywhere, to be honest, right? And since you mentioned geopolitical tailwinds only provide tailwinds to something that already exists and is happening, right? And if I were to therefore go back and think about what India could naturally be good at, I think the first one that comes to mind is artificial intelligence. We have already demonstrated prowess there. We have some very interesting companies that have emerged in India, which are based off the core of AI used in multiple use cases. And it's such a vast area, right? It encompasses so many things. And we have just scratched the surface, to be honest, with AI. And the possibilities are immense, whether it is healthcare, AI in healthcare, and then you dive deep a little bit further, it could be diagnostics, it could be therapeutics, it could be wellness in healthcare. So there's just so much that could be done from an AI standpoint to bring in efficiencies into the system, as well as to disrupt the way we approach certain things, which could be something as simple as discovering a drug, but it could be something very different, which is enabling digital lending, which one of our portfolio companies helps in using an AI engine. So I think that is one big area. And I say that the reason why I call it out as the biggest is because being an IT nation, we're known to be an IT nation, at least from a services standpoint. I think we have the talent that is required to build very solid AI type of solutions. The second part, I think, and I'd like to call out where we have a lot of tailwinds really, and this is also geopolitically enhanced, is the biotech side of things. And the reason is, again, very similar. See, we've been the generics player as far as pharmaceuticals have been concerned, right? We've had some good CROs emerge from India. So there is a base and there is talent. And I think all these companies which have been in the generic space are now thinking about what's next and can we go into novel, right? Can we build novel drugs? Can we build novel molecules? And I think a startup ecosystem is also emerging over there, which will help drive discovery of novel molecules, but at the same time, tech platforms that will enable all this. And some of those could be AI-led as well. So tech-led biotech type of platform. So that is the second area, but there you need a lot of patient capital. Deep tech by nature needs patient capital. And we have very little patient capital because, like water seeks the lowest level, capital seeks the highest returns at every point in time. And every VC fund manager who's coming in has a choice as to what they address. And most of them are saying, but deep tech, log gestation, should we be investing? And I've always been a proponent that the government does have to go where private capital doesn't venture. And so going back to Asha's point, I think there's also scope for a lot of government capital to flow into startups that are, especially the high gestation ones where it takes a while to turn around results, and provide patient capital, not necessarily directly, but through identifying good fund managers who are professional and able to do that and with a focus on deep tech. So we need to scale the amount of capital, but these are the two areas. There are many more. I could spend an entire hour talking about them, but I'll stop with these two being the primary ones.
Sure. So AI and biotech noted, Ashwin. Asha will ask you now. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi.
Asha, Ashwin mentioned AI and biotech are two areas where India can actually make some moves and it will have a major global impact, hopefully. What are your views on riding on the geopolitical tailwinds, and where are the opportunities where we can make use of?
Are you talking about for the Indian startup world?
Yeah.
Vaishnavi, the Indian startup world, the Indian entrepreneurs are the best in the world. They know, frankly, much better than most of us do because they are on the ground. They are sniffing out opportunities, and especially with the Web 3.0, everything is moving so fast that there is no way a venture capitalist can keep pace. It has to be an entrepreneur, a youngster, anywhere from age 10 and up, especially in Web 3.0, who are working, 24/7 on figuring out where are the pain points, where are the opportunities, and they are nailing it.
So if India steps in, what would be the impact on the duopoly that China and US have established in the deep tech section? And what could it mean for, say, infrastructure support, for talent, for attrition, and also for import, export, and trade?
So let me talk about talent first, right? And then come to capital actually and capital flows. On the talent side, I think what we are seeing very interestingly is a true globalization in a sense. While back in, let's say again, a decade back, if I were to go to the emergence of captives in India was to tap into India as a back office hub, less about talent, but more about back office and low cost. You saw several companies from the US setting up back offices and captive sectors here. Many of them have evolved to become profit centers as well, or innovation hubs, R&D centers. What is happening very recently over the last few months is that startups from across the world are setting up Indian subs to tap into the talent that is available here from an engineering standpoint, right? So you're seeing a little bit of a true globalization in a sense of startups that are sitting outside coming here trying to tap into India talent. That's of course leading to significant escalations in talent costs. So startups like ours in our portfolio are trying hard to compete now in India against international startups, not some other part of the globe for to capture some part of the market. It's in India against international startups. So that's, and for talent, not for markets, right? So, that's a very, very strong dynamic that is taking place, which is actually, really truly globalizing things. The second part, I mean, since you spoke about the US-China duopoly, right, so to speak, I think a lot of capital has been going into China over the last decade or so, seeking returns across deep tech and even other areas, right? And when we were just pre-lockdown, when we were, doing our rounds in other parts of the world to raise capital for our fund, and I think this has been the experience of other fund managers, the question that was coming from a lot of, let's say, sovereign funds, from other fund managers, either in the US, in the Middle East, other parts of the world, was that perhaps it's the time for India. And they're seeing India today as where China was maybe 10 years back or 12 years back, and gave them those supernormal returns. And while they were, still thinking it through, I think what we are trying to do as fund managers and across, not just me, but across our VCP industry in India, is to be able to demonstrate that, listen, this is the right home for their capital if they're really seeking growth. And I think some of the recent events in our IPO markets, for example, in the ability of many of our startups to have big acquisitions, means that there is a clear direction that points out that returns and exits are achievable in India. And I think that's going to accelerate the flow of capital from other parts of the world into India and Indian startups in a far bigger way. And some of that is actually a replacement of capital that would have been going into China. So we are going to, so these are 3 or 4 things that are coming together. And I don't think it is going to be about US and China anymore. I think we're, definitely going to be a big part of that play, as our startups especially start creating solutions for international markets. And that's where I think DeepTech comes in, which is we have a bunch of startups which are addressing the Indian consumer story and Indian markets and getting capital from all over the world. And that's been the case with, again, like go back to the same names, the Flipkarts, the Olas, but there are a few hundred startups like that which have done well playing the India consumption story. I think the next piece, while this story will continue, I think the next piece is going to be deep tech and SaaS or enterprise tech startups from India addressing global markets and global enterprises. And for that to happen, today, India is only a test market on the enterprise B2B side. Our scale markets are still international. I would like Indian enterprise markets to also become a scale market, and that will really accelerate some of this happening. But I do see this duopoly no longer being, restricted and no longer a duo, so to speak.
Good. And for that to happen, we do have certain advantages as a geography, right? What are those, and which ones do you think we should lean on to heavily?
So I think the key is talent. When it comes to tech, deep tech, startup world, I think it's the core advantage that we have is talent at scale. And there are now solutions that are coming to even increase the quality of that talent and the numbers of those talents, right? Because the edtech space, the boom in that demonstrates that people are really looking to go up the talent curve as well through consuming some of these products, either at a very basic education level or at an upskilling level. So I think we need to nurture that in a bigger way. But what's going to happen as a result is, like I spoke about earlier, startups from outside are also going to come in and try and tap this talent. So it may not end up becoming too, let's say, the walls may not be there and shouldn't be there, rightfully so. But I do think some efforts to improve the talent. The second part is I do think that we need to change perhaps mindsets in enterprise. And that's happening already. And we are grappling with how to make it happen even more through programmatic interventions, ensure that enterprises in India become very strong consumers of startup solutions. We saw it in the fintech world, the BFSI enterprises, banks, insurers are looking at startups, setting up their own accelerator programs, and they're normally the first to move, right? Or the early adopters. And then the slowest to move have been, let's say, for example, enterprises like hospitals, which are saying, hey, we're in the business of saving lives. We can't mess around with a startup solution, but it's also changing. And if we can bring these two, the market and the solution provider together in a bigger way, but not just bring them together, I think enterprises in India need to understand very clearly that startups need to get monetized very quickly. So you don't run a free pilot. You pay them if you're running a pilot. You're quick to adopt. You decide quickly. You don't take it through large sales cycles. And eventually, ticket sizes must be remunerative. We see a lot of Indian enterprises, the best, capping the amount of outgo, because once you have to pay out to a vendor above a certain amount, then it just goes into an infinite loop within the enterprise. So the ability to rapidly adopt startup solutions. And I do think that, again, the government can play a role here, because the government is a huge customer, right? And they have enough money to spend on solutions, and they should be amongst the early adopters of startup solutions. Do it at scale. Try and have a very clear policy which says that we will try and adopt, of course, high quality solutions that emerge from startups and give it some sort of priority and preference. And that could be, they could become, the government as a customer concept could kick off in a big way.
Sure. Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you for that insight. We have with us Mr. Sushant Rabra, who's partner digital consulting for KPMG. Hello, Sushant. Welcome to the panel.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me over. It's a very prestigious platform, and I am quite honored to be here today.
Sushant, when we speak about China and India, of course, we are looking at some of the geopolitical changes that has increased the focus on the country, and we are now suddenly being termed as a hotbed for technological innovation. What are those factors, and how have they come into play?
I think let's go back a little bit to understand how we reached here. So if you look at last roughly 10 years, of all the investments which are being done in deep tech, more than 70% of those investments have landed either in the US or in China. In US, the ecosystem, of course, has been driven more by the private enterprise, whereas in case of China, and the classic case being the AI program that was run, it was a 3-year AI national program with significant investment by the government, spawning off almost 1,000 startups in that space. So the genesis is very different, but the big investments have been in that space. And the outcome also has been there for us to see. So for example, if you look at roughly 2,500 odd deep tech startups which are there in Asia, roughly about 1,000 are from China, and China has been investing heavily, building on each of these startups in very diverse areas, from aerospace to material sciences to semiconductors to displays to consumer technology and so on. And the ecosystem has been working very well. Now, it was all going very well, but I think in the last 2-3 years, there are certain geopolitical dimensions which have come in, which have caused the investors to pause and think about their investment strategies. So the first and foremost theme is around the enhanced regulatory scrutiny in China. So we all heard about the Chinese government very carefully looking at some of the behemoths in China. And it's all in the news, so I don't need to repeat the names here. And looking at whether those technology giants as well as startups are not following the law, if not in letter, not in spirit as well. And there have been a lot of concerns around that in that regard. Now, from an investor standpoint, the one thing that you look for is policy continuity and certainty, because it allows you to make money on investments. When in a country the policy changes are happening for, of course, the right reasons, it forces the investors to take a pause and relook at what they are doing. So therefore, that is the factor number one, I would say, which is causing a change. And I wouldn't say that policy changes are not happening elsewhere in the world. In India as well, there have been fair degree of policy changes. But the speed and pace and the quantum of such changes have been quite unprecedented in China, in whatever we remember collectively. The second theme, of course, is around the world where we don't have a unipolar world anymore, where the Western nations sort of anchor the world in technology might as well as economic prowess. In that sense, the power has been shifting to the east, quite notably to China. So China, of course, as you're aware, recently crossed US in terms of the number of wealthy millionaires and the overall wealth generated and so on, and is expected to pretty much be in the pole position in the rest of the century as well. So as that shift is happening in terms of the power equation in the world, countries are looking at technology as a key lever which will help their economies compete with other economies. And consequently, there are these non-trade, non-tariff barriers which are coming through, right? In terms of, for example, enhanced regulatory scrutiny for cross-border transactions, data privacy laws, cybersecurity laws, and so on and so forth. Now, because of that, organizations which have an exposure to both US and China, they are rethinking how to place their bets, right? And some of those organizations were caught on the wrong side of the stick when the entire change happened, and they had to very quickly realign, redesign, and so on and so forth. That's a theme number two. And a related theme on theme number three is around realignment of the supply chains. The world realized that large part of their supply chains, especially in deep tech, you talk about semiconductors, rare earth metals, and so on and so forth. Large part of that passes through China or Chinese factories. Now, the world over, countries are realizing there is a merit in having multiple redundancies in the entire chain, because a chain works beautifully well from an efficiency standpoint, but when, let's say, there is a disruption, then the entire chain collapses. We are seeing this very, I would say, grandly play out in the semiconductor shortage across the world. So therefore, companies are looking at counterweights in that sense to place their bets or spread their risks beyond the China market as well. And therefore, they are looking at other countries. Some are going to, in that sense, Korea, some are going to Japan, Australia, Taiwan, India, and so on. So they are all looking at options all around the world. And the fourth and the last point I wanted to mention is around digital talent, right? Now, from a talent standpoint, of course, China and US have had an advantage. If you look at the number of patents which have been filed in the deep tech space, these two countries would be leading all the rest of the world by a big margin, right? So in that sense, they are investing heavily in that. But what it also does is that it drives us the scarcity of talent, rate at which the talent is available, and so on and so forth. And consequently, when organizations are looking at innovating, investing, setting up their innovation centers, they want to look at other sources of talent, and consequently, they are looking at, let's say, Eastern Europe, India, and many other parts of the world where you have great tech talent available, which could be cultivated, grown on the deep tech space. So these are the four, I would say, themes which are playing out, which are necessitating many organizations to relook at their deep tech journey and their investments.
Got it, Sushant, and thank you for detailing that out. Now, then let's come to the million-dollar question. Can India then act as a counterweight to China in the deep tech race? Where do we need to take action? Where do we need to bridge the gaps?
Right. So there are, I would say, a few elements to that. First is a point-in-time answer to essentially what is a long-term question. So in the long run, do we see India growing its deep tech network in the economy from a skill perspective, policy support perspective, economic activity perspective? I think the answer is quite clear. It is yes. So India is making significant investments, and the government is also quite supportive in building out many of these industries over here in India and expanding them. Just as an illustration, just I think in 2020, what I understand is of every dollar of investment that went from foreign investors, not domestic ones, to China, about $1.50 actually went into India. So in that sense, that change in the investment appetite and investment behavior is already happening, right? So that's completely there. Second theme is, even I would say organic growth on deep tech is quite rapid. So India currently has some, depending on whom you ask, about 350 deep tech startups, to some people say as high as 1500 deep tech startups, depending on how you define deep tech. But there is a strong focus on work around, I would say, deep tech, not just, let's say, the consumer tech, insure tech, that what we have seen a lot of progress on. We are seeing great strides being made, for example, and there are tons of Indian companies in battery technology, semiconductor, aerospace, and areas which hitherto were seen as something which might not be addressed by the investment appetite the typical Indian investor has, but they have been flourishing quite well. So what I believe is, the way our wider e-commerce or startup ecosystem has flourished, some years down the line, our deep tech ecosystem would also flourish. That is what I really believe and hope towards. The third theme is around policy support. So if you see through the, for example, themes around production linked incentive, startup India, digital India, government is also providing a lot of opportunities, supports, platforms for these startups to come forth and make a change for India. So let's innovate, for India, being from India. And I think there we are seeing that India is second to none in terms of the talent and the brain power we have, and we can, if we put our collective thought behind it, actually make a difference. So from that perspective, I remain quite, I would say, hopeful as well as positive in the long run. In the medium run, yes, it will not be a clear winner kind of a scenario. You would see, certain factors play out. So, for example, last year or even this year, if you look at number of unicorns being founded in India, this year maybe India had a great run. When the pandemic recedes, there might be some change. So for a few years, I see that going up and down a little bit. But in the long run, I would say India would be a strong contender in this space globally. At this time, given the nature of the evolution, it will be hard to hazard a guess, saying whether we will be number one or a number two or a number three. But let me just say that we will be definitely holding our rightful place in the world stage from a deep tech perspective.
Got it, Sushant. And that makes us optimistic as well. But then, if we could learn what has worked for China, and then what are the competitive advantages we have and what we stand on, so that we can enhance on those.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid question that you asked. Saying if it has worked for China, and China possibly was in our situation many years ago. So if they have been able to build it, what is it that they have done very well, right? So let me go one by one. The first and foremost theme is around their investment in talent, right? So China has actually set up leading institutes specifically focusing on the technologies around nanotech, AI, robotics, IoT, and so on. And the quantum of investment is quite substantial. So they have actually sat down and developed a way to have a good talent pipeline, which will tomorrow support that kind of an ecosystem. So, which is, I think, a wonderful thing to do. We must also complement the way they have set up the quality of those institutes from a talent standpoint. As I mentioned earlier, the number of PhDs today who are working in this space, I think one of the largest chunks of such global pool comes from China today. They have had excellent academic cross relations with their counterparts across the world, and therefore they're very quickly harmonizing the leading edge information and learning techniques and experiments around that at home. So that's one. And I would say returning Chinese have also played a very good part in actually bringing the best of the world back to China. So that's theme number one. Second thing that has worked very well for China is very strong state support in innovation. So, for example, if I was to just pick up one element around AI, right? So China actually formulated its AI policy quite a number of years ago. They actually started in almost 2017 when they launched what they call as Plan for Development of New Generation AI. And then they did not just keep it at the central level, they actually brought it down to local policy level as well, saying what are the local governments doing to promote such ecosystems growth over there. And the outcome of that was, for example, they had more than 1,000 AI-related companies being set up. They, in fact, invested heavily. One classic example is there is an AI industrial park in China, and they invested close to $2 billion on one industrial park. I mean, look at the size or the quantum of investment that the government is making, because they are, I would say, chasing the long-term goal. So China, in fact, has set up a vision for itself to say that we want to be the world's leading power in AI by 2030. And they have defined metrics to be there. So in that sense, not just the central government, but local governments, the associated machinery, all is aligned to those tangible goals with very specific KPIs, which make the wheels move on the ground. Right? So that's theme number two. Theme number three is that China has always promoted local technology. So while you have equivalent of Uber outside China, you have local pair Didi, which is very strong over there. Similar for Amazon, then you have Tencent, Alibaba, and the list just goes on. So I would say that supportive ecosystem has been wonderful. It has allowed for not just the local giants to come up, but those local giants to also rub off their technology prowess and innovation streak to other startups there. So think about number of people who would have worked on Tencent and then gone ahead and started their own startups in the deep tech space, right? So that entire ecosystem multiplier effect is something also which has happened very, very well for China. And the fourth and last point I would like to mention is China does not innovate only for China. China also innovates for the world. China is one of the factory, as they say, it's the factory of the world. Yeah, large part of manufacturing, innovation, production happens there. So the technology that they develop, many a times, if not all, also gets used to service the demand which is coming from rest of the world, and it allows Chinese companies to become much more competitive. So in that sense, the addressable market for a deep tech startup in China is not just China, it's China plus the derived demand that is coming through to it. So I would say these are the four factors which have worked very well for China. And if the past is any indication, I believe the Chinese government and their business leaders will continue that path to success.
Thank you, Sushant. That was insightful, and thank you for taking time out and joining us on this panel. And we learned a lot. And hopefully, we can use these action points to make India the deep tech destination of the world and bring in more innovation and capital into the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. It was a very nice to be on this panel today and discuss our thoughts with various members. Glad to stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you.